Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you might be at in the world. Welcome, everybody. This is the Microsoft Graph community call for August of 2020. Today, we have two exciting topics for us. We've got a throttling update, talk about Microsoft Graph changes that are happening with our throttling documentation and other areas, and also a topic on people-centric experiences from one of our PMs in the profile space. So as your host, my name is Brian T. Jackett. We also have with us Jeremy Thake, who is our CPX team lead, as well as Kevin Bellinger, who will be talking about the people-centric experiences. Our first topic that we want to cover is going to be the Microsoft Graph throttling, which I'll be covering. We've got a number of different updates that have been coming through in the last month or so, and we want to kind of cover what are some of those changes that have come down the pipe, but also a little bit about what you can expect in the future as well for things in this space. Now, at a very high level, you may have seen this previously. We have our documentation for Microsoft Graph throttling. We got the link up here on the top of the page. Now, at a very high level, what's important to know about throttling for Microsoft Graph is that we have a number of different throttling levels. So if you look at the very top, we're going to have some kind of graph all-up limits. So this is just going to be independent of any of the specific workloads you might be calling. There are some things that apply to Microsoft Graph as a whole. One step below this, you'll see that there are different limits that might apply that Microsoft Graph applies on behalf of workloads. This is a very rare case, but you might see this in terms of some different workloads that don't have limits in place, or they may not have a consistent set of limits that are out there. And in these scenarios, you'll see that Graph will actually imply throttling on their behalf. Next layer down is going to be the main kind of area that we want to talk about today, which is the service-specific limits, which happen per workload. Now, in the past, we only had documentation for one of our workloads, which was Exchange. But over time, we were seeing that a lot of our customers and partners, they were looking for more information about, well, what can I expect in other areas? So we'd like to dive a little bit deeper into that today. And lastly, you might see that there are some downstream dependencies as well. So things that are not Graph specific, but they are things that are being used further on beyond just Graph. So some of those times, those limits will come into play for throttling. Now, what's important here is that when you are sending a request to Microsoft Graph, we are evaluating across all these different various service levels. Now, the first one that triggers, that will actually initiate the throttling. So you may be saying that, hey, I'm not hitting a service-specific one, but you are hitting a all-up limit or some of the kind of configuration like that. So just note that we do apply all the different rules, the different throttling thresholds, and the first one that gets hit ends up triggering into the throttling scenarios. Now, in our documentation, we do cover what are ways to avoid this, what are ways to recover from throttling impacts. So you'll see that we do apply a 429 response, which is going to be for too many requests being sent in. And in that, it'll give you a retry header, which tells you how long should you wait before you retry another request. So following those kinds of scenarios and those kind of guidance, that should help you reduce the impact that you see for this. Now, in terms of what we have seen for kind of the in-progress updates for our throttling limits, as I mentioned previously, only Exchange was really the one that was documented out there. And we would tell you, hey, for a mailbox per app that you have registered, here's how many mailboxes you can go and query within a specific amount of time. Over the past 2+ months or so, we've actually had 30 or more pull requests being submitted to our documentation site. So there's been a lot of updates in this space. So if you've looked at throttling guidance in the past, maybe 6 months or so, it's really worth going back and looking to see what is the most up-to-date information out there. We do actually have a couple more pull requests that are in progress right now. So all this will be done out in the open. If it's something that you are interested in or want to take a look into, feel free to go to the doc site and take a look through the pull requests. You can see specifically what has been documented, what things are currently still out there, and what's going to be available for that. So in terms of updates, you'll see that there is now additional guidance for areas like Teams, for online meetings, for a number of the other specific workloads that are out there. So a lot of information to be able to go forward and take a look at. So with that, I do want to pull up the documentation site really quickly. And here you can see our documentation page for Microsoft Graph throttling. And note here again is our guidance on what to do if you encounter throttling. Again, the 429s for 2-minute requests. If you go beyond that and you start getting, I believe it's 503s, that might be a scenario where essentially you're getting blocked because you're not adhering to what those 429s are that are coming back. Again, ways to handle our throttling. And then you can actually go in and see here are all the new, so all the resources that support the retry after headers. Again, if you find something that hasn't been documented or your encounter scenario that's not currently in line with what's out there, please do let us know. You can submit feedback on the actual page here. That'll help us to identify what are perhaps those gaps or those areas that we haven't yet covered. Down here is the important area where we've made a lot of improvements in the last couple months, which is that service-specific limits. So you can see, again, here's our Exchange stuff. But as you go down, you'll see that there's a lot more that's been added. So for to-dos, cloud communications, OneNote, Project Roam for our roaming services, Teams. And a note about Teams, they do have some additional information on here under this Microsoft Teams limits. So do go in there and take a look at that. But you can see a lot more information is in here. Now, one thing I do want to call out is this has been a gradual approach. Really, the first phase of this documentation update was go and get all those service-specific updates documented first. We realized that by putting all this information out there, the organization for this, it might be hard to find the specific thing that you're looking for. So if you wanted to jump to, we'll say the education service limits, you really have to scroll down through the page to actually find that. There's additional work that's in place right now or in progress right now to address that. So we will have more kind of coherency in terms of the documentation that's out there or findability for it. So be aware that that is coming. It's just, we're taking this in a phased approach. First is document everything, then work on the organization, and then start kind of a phase 3 is look for those niche scenarios that don't fit into ones that are currently defined. As you know, we have a large number of different APIs and workloads on top of Microsoft Graph. So we're trying to get this into a consistent format so that no matter which workload you're using, whichever API you're calling into, you're going to get a very consistent result based on what you're seeing back from that. And then one other important area, scroll to the very bottom on here, just note that the subscriptions as well, this is if you're doing anything in terms of change notifications or webhooks. We do have documentation for that as well, which will apply across any of the different resources you might be calling into for change notifications. Now, we would love to hear what your feedback is on any of the documentation updates that you're seeing or some of the changes that might be pushed out. One of the kind of main areas we're looking for is, are there any kind of business critical blockers that you're running into because of throttling? We talked to a number of partners and customers on a daily, if not weekly basis, kind of hearing from their experiences. What are you experiencing? What kind of things are you running into? Is there anything that is preventing you from actually getting the work done that you need to? Those are things that we can then take back to the different workload teams and be able to work with them. A couple of things that can be helpful for that feedback that you may share. What is the frequency that you're running into any kind of throttling scenarios? What are the specific APIs or endpoints that you're calling when that happens? And also, how many tenants are impacted based on those calls? If you're a line of business customer and it's just your tenant, that's great. If you're a partner and you're hitting, dozens and dozens of tenants, that also helps us understand, where is that prioritization or where those areas most being felt by the folks using Microsoft Graph. And again, as I mentioned, this is kind of a phased approach. So you'll see that there's more and more information being shared on this as we go along. But if you find that there's areas that they're maybe not as well documented as they should be, or you need additional information because we've released new APIs, new resources, and we haven't yet documented those, please do let us know. It'll be very helpful for us to understand what we need to focus on in terms of getting those things addressed. And lastly, one piece that we did see come up, you saw a blog post, I think it's about 2-3 months ago. We mentioned that there were throttling limits that were on the beta version for those APIs. We then applied them also to the V1 endpoint. We are interested to know, was there anyone who was impacted by that, where, hey, things were working fine in V1, but as soon as those beta throttling limits came over to V1, did that impact your scenarios, did that impact any solutions that you were building? So please let us know in terms of information like that. If you'd like to put it in the chat window, if you'd like to reach out to us offline as well, please do let us know on that. So that I will pause here for any questions, and I'll pull up the chat window.
There was a question on, do you have samples of using the .NET SDK to handle throttling?
I do not believe we have samples in our documentation. I will say that with the SDK in general, this does handle a lot of things like the caching of your access tokens or being able to understand what those response messages would be. So you should have basically a well-typed response that you can be able to monitor for. We'll have to check with Jason Johnson to see if he has any kind of samples on that.
Yeah, we did
a presentation at Ignite last year where we walked through how the SDK works and what throttling it does do. I'll put the links for that presentation in the chat window. I'm just going to go dig it out from the Ignite site. And we specifically kind of stop the SDK doing the throttling and then flip the throttling on, so you can see the differences in what the SDK did and what it didn't when it was enabled. So I'll find that, Alexandra, and put it in the chat window.
Okay, that'd be great. I see another question here. OneDrive throttling limits. This is one of the areas where we are still working on getting more information about that. If you look in our docs on here, we do have basically a call out for that. And there is a link over to documentation from the SharePoint side, SharePoint and OneDrive. And you'll see, why can't you get just in a specific exact throttling limit for SharePoint and OneDrive? Part of it is due to they don't have a defined limit. It's almost a elastic limit. So based on the load that's going into the entire SharePoint farm or OneDrive tenant that's out there, you'll see that it's almost a sliding scale. So it's not a hard defined limit out there. So SharePoint and OneDrive do have additional guidance for like their REST APIs and CSOM in terms of throttling. Microsoft Graph will follow similar, but not exactly the same types of limits out there. Okay, so Jeremy shared the link out there. Is there a call record throttling limit? I believe there is. I do not see it in our documentation. I think if you go to the team-specific information, though, we have some information on that. Over here. Again, this is one of those areas where I don't see this documented today. Again, that'd be a good thing that you can submit an issue for to call for additional documentation on that. Yeah, I'm not able to find it just at this moment. I'll take a look after our community call here and see if there's any additional information on that. Other questions, other comments, things that you're looking for, any kind of feedback based on throttling experience in the previous calls? Yes, as Paul mentioned out there, Daryl Miller, who owns our SDKs at the moment, he did some work on a chaos handler. If you're familiar with Netflix and some other large organizations, they've got things like Chaos Monkey or other types of basically middleware that will inject failures. So you can actually test out things like, hey, I'm getting throttled, or I've got a service connection interruption. I know Daryl doesn't work on this probably a year or so ago, so I'm not sure what state that's currently in, but there has been discussions around how can we actually simulate this. So if I wanted to get a 429 on demand, or if I wanted to randomly inject it into my queries, that's something that we as a team are looking at. And we'd love some feedback in terms of what's the best way that you would like to see that implemented, or what are ways that you'd like to experience that or see that implemented. So we've got a number of different kind of ideas out there, but I don't believe anything concrete at the moment. If there's no further questions, we will turn the floor over to Kevin.
Sounds good. Thanks, Brian. Thank you for the opportunity to come and present to everybody. My name's Kevin. I'm a PM on the People Services group. So we control all of the people services that power Microsoft 365, things like Contact API, the Profile API, which we announced at Ignite last year. We also have the Photo APIs as well. I'm sure I'll get some feedback about that. Today, I want to give a quick update on some of the work the team has been doing in the first half of the year. Talk a little bit about the path towards GA for Profile, and then also give a quick demonstration of some great work that we released at the beginning of the summer around customizing the M365 profile card, which hopefully some of you have seen, but if not, I hope you're excited about. If I talk about Profile Preview, so the Profile entity we announced at Ignite last year, we've been steadily working on that for past 6 or 7 months, and we've been getting a lot of great feedback from you, our customers. And as a result of that feedback, we've added some entities. Some of these will be very familiar. Some of them are things that have cropped up since Ignite last year. But generally speaking, in August, we'll be adding support for about 50% more entities within the profile, things like notes. So the ability to have a personal annotation about yourself and really express a little bit about your personality within your profile as well. There's certifications, awards, and patents. These are very common things that people have on, say, a LinkedIn profile that we've been hearing from, especially our larger customers or customers within regulated industries, that they also need support for in order to find that person that has a specific welding certification or managing an oil rig or something like that. In addition to that, we've got things like publications, where someone has been mentioned in the news or they've written a research article or academic paper that they want to have associated with their profile as well. So all of the documentation is in the final stages of review right now. We hope that it will go live sometime in the next 1 to 2 weeks, but we didn't want to wait until the next month's call before we told you about it. So keep an eye out for that announcement in the coming weeks. I also want to, again, give a very big shout out to the Microsoft Graph Toolkit team, and especially really highlight how easy it is to work with the profile entities using the Graph Toolkit. So what you see here is just a representation of a mock-up experience that I built myself last week during one of the hackathons that Microsoft has annually. And what you see on the left is how easy it was for me to actually retrieve the interests that are stored within my profile and then represent them in the UX. So you see effectively a one-line MGT get resource call, and using the template, I was able to render not only the name of the interest, but also a description if one existed, and then also surface the URL or thumbnail image for that particular interest. Similarly, I can do that for languages, patents, awards, all of these new entities are coming. So we're able to build these very rich experiences using the Profile API, and we're trying to make it as flexible as possible for both our first and our third-party customers to be able to really develop on top of Microsoft Graph and create people experiences. The next thing I want to talk about is the profile card customization work. So this is another piece of work that we announced at Ignite in 2019. We launched it in July. And what it allows is a tenant admin to surface some of the data that happens to be in Active Directory or Azure Active Directory today that isn't actually showing up on the M365 profile card. So we've got a walkthrough tutorial, which gives you step-by-step for going and configuring the tenant side configuration and the properties and how you'd like to represent those properties within profile card. And then we've got a bunch of great documentation about how you manage and customize it even further with things like localizations and the like. So I'm going to take a quick break here, and we'll go in and I'll give a quick demonstration of that work. And then what we'll be able to do is come back and answer any questions on either profile or profile card customizations. Okay, so what you see here is Postman. What we have is a user in one of my demo tenants, Alex W. What we have is the 15 custom attributes that are stored in Active Directory. They're represented in Graph as on-premises extension attributes. Now, if these were to show up in the experience today, they would just show up with custom attribute 1 or 2 or 3 in this case. It's not very meaningful, and it's kind of hard for anybody to take any meaning from that unless you know explicitly what that piece of information is meant to represent. So what we did was we created the profile card properties collection within the organization settings container. Now, what this allows us to do is take a directory property name. In this case, we've already set custom attribute 3 to represent the birth date of a user within an organization. That means if the property was present on a user, in this case, with Alex, what we see is his birthday is February 29th. Rather than representing it as custom attribute 3, February 29th, we would actually render in the profile card with a display name of birthday for this particular user. The post itself is actually very simple. You're able to just go directly to profile card properties, enter the directory property name. In this case, we'll use a custom attribute 2, which is the cost center for our user, and then our annotation of display name cost center. Now, you're able, for organizations that are not only having a single language as their organizational language, it might be that in Germany you use German, in Norway you want to use Norwegian, and in America you want to use English. What you're able to do is also set localizations that allow you to have a different string depending on the locale of the user that happens to be using the service. So what we'll do here is we'll go ahead and we'll post in custom attribute 2. That will hopefully succeed. It did. That would have been embarrassing. And now if we do a quick get, what we should see is we now have 2 annotations that are returned, one being for the birthday and one being for the cost center. So if we go to Chrome, what we see here is the administrator actually doesn't have anything set. So because the admin in this tenant actually doesn't have any values set, what we do is we don't return anything. So rather than trying to put a label in that will never have a value if not set, instead what we do is only surface the label and the value if it happens to be populated. So if we go back to our hero Alex, I think it was. Here what we see is if we go to the contact panel, there we have cost center and the value of the custom attribute that happens to be there. So with that, that's really all I wanted to show and talk about today. So if anybody has questions, please raise your hand to speak or file in the chat.
See one question here. Is this distinct from the profile API? This looks like the user entity. Will we have a similar ability to extend profile entity?
Which profile API, I guess, is my question there. So M365 has a handful of profile APIs today. If it's the one that is in beta in Microsoft Graph, then the idea is the properties represented within the profile will actually become possible to also surface within the profile card within a short period of time, whether that be extensions that you add yourself, or whether that's just first-class fields that aren't today represented on the on the profile card.
Yeah, Jim confirmed yes, the one in beta.
Okay, great. Yeah, it's the same stack. It's a separate set of methods within that stack.
Okay. Lou is asking, any plans to extend this ability to computers and devices in Azure? Not having writable attributes on them is kind of an annoyance.
I think that sounds like a great feature request. It's the part of the reason why we've gone about this was because of some of the challenges that the directory object represents. Devices by design are directory objects in that case. So I think it's an interesting feature request to ask for. It probably won't end up in the profile anytime soon, though. I'm sorry.
Benjamin asking, what about extended attributes from AD on-prem?
If we're talking about the properties 16 to 45, we're looking at how to ingest those and make them forward syncable. If it's not that, then please send me a quick email and we can take a chat about it.
They're saying extension _ GUID.
Okay, the Scalar extensions. We're also looking at those as well. There's roughly, I think it's 6 extension mechanisms we're aware of for the user object as of right now. So we're trying really hard to make sure we don't add a 7th, but rather we can start consolidating them.
Standards, as soon as you have one, then you've got 20. Next question from John. Is there a way to identify users that don't have profile data for a custom field like birth date?
Not right now. We are looking into what I'll call more graph-like capabilities that allow you to iterate over all of the users within a given organization. In that case, we'd be able to filter based on the presence or absence of a value in that property.
So would that be using like a filter on the query to users, or?
It would be either a filter or a select. I think it would depend on how we implemented it, to be honest.
Okay.
It's a very common request we receive from organizations that want to understand, one, how complete people's profiles are, and then two, take steps to increase the amount of data that's contained within them.
Sure. Another question. Will there be a security layer? Example, external users should not be seeing the birth date or cost center.
Yes, that's actually there today. So we have the notion of allowed audiences. Right now, the implementation works for me, which is only I can see a piece of information in my profile. Organization, all user objects within my organization, and then call it everyone, which is anybody can see it. As we continue the road to GA, we're working on scoping to things like groups, federated organizations, and there's a handful of others that we're looking at. So that is one thing we hear quite commonly as well, is as we look at ways to enhance the amount of information that is shared within a profile, we also need to be very cognizant of the fact that not everybody wants to share everything with everybody. A great example is pronouns, which is something we've been working on for a while now, but we need to be very respectful of the needs of people to also feel like they can comfortably express themselves also securely.
And would that be configured by the user or by the tenant admin for the security?
Both. Okay. We're working very hard on ensuring that we can both give users control of their data, but also allow admins to set defaults for their tenants as well.
Okay, makes sense. I don't see any other questions. Any other closing remarks or things that you want to send off with?
No, I think please feel free to give us feedback. Anything we've missed, anything you'd like to see present in the profile or in the profile card customization capabilities, other things that we should be building related to people and the data related to them. Please feel free to either ping me by email or Twitter.
One last question came in here. Will extensions be filterable? They're not presently, but will they soon? I think this was to your point earlier about something that you're looking into.
Yeah, so the modern profile service, which is the one that's in beta right now, our plan is to make extensions filterable, recognizing that they're not now in directory or in SharePoint.
Okay. See nothing else. If anyone else has any further questions, feel free to put them into the chat window, and we'll follow up with Kevin afterwards. Kevin, thank you so much for your time. It's very helpful, and appreciate all of your input here.
Yeah, thank you very much for letting me come and talk to everybody.
You flip back over to slide deck. At this point, open forum. So if you have any questions relating to Microsoft Graph, any of the other ancillary services, feel free to put them into the chat window. Feel free to raise your hand on the meeting if you'd like something that you'd like to discuss. Kevin, one other question I see coming in here. Will attributes be multi-valued?
If by attribute we mean extensions, then yes, it will be possible to have multi-value.
Thank you. I believe that would be for extensions. Yep.
Yep.
Rachel says thank you.
Perfect.
And do you have any plans for graph-based data presented in graph web part or something, just like highlighted web part? Talking about web parts in SharePoint Online or somewhere else? SharePoint Online. Yeah, so if you are using SharePoint Framework, SPFX, it is possible to create client-side web parts. And as part of that, they have a built-in capability. There is a client, I believe it's called MS Graph Client, which has the capability of making calls out to Microsoft Graph. So if you're looking to run queries as the user, there is a basically a mechanism for making those calls using that client. And you'll be able to, the permissioning is a little bit different, whereas there is a tenant scoped application that makes the calls on your behalf. So it's not a individual app registration that you would bring to the table. Instead, there's one that's out there and you'll apply permissions to it. Once that is consented, you are able to make calls out to be able to into Graph from a SharePoint Framework web part. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, partly. Sorry, I'll just explain the question here. I'm familiar with the MS Client, MS Graph Client API to build SPFX web parts. I was just wondering if there's out of the box, any future, plans of developing such a web part where you can use and configure just like we configure query. And bring objects and whatever you want to display in that web part using Microsoft Graph, something out of the box. So
I see. So like an out of the box web part, one that's not custom or downloaded from externally.
Right.
I'm not aware of any plans for anything like that. Jeremy, do you have anything on the roadmap or other areas where that's been discussed?
No, I haven't seen it. Kevin, is that something that you've been working with a SharePoint group on either? I mean, this is something obviously that can be done as a PMP web part, but that again isn't really answering the question of it being out of the box and more of a community-led effort. The Microsoft Graph Toolkit obviously will have components that you can use and put in to SPFX web parts. But Kevin, is there anything on the table regarding a native web part that will show up in the library, the web parts library for all tenants?
It's something we had a very brief conversation about before COVID. I think the team has been a little bit busy since COVID, so I can pick up again and ask them, but I suspect it's fallen off the radar.
Okay, no problem. Thank you.
See a question on will there be some samples for using the notification API? Are you talking about change notifications, i.e. the webhooks? Push notifications to a user. Let me follow the link to make sure I'm doing the same thing. Oh, you're saying push like a mobile push notifications, or even like the Windows notifications? Yeah, that I'm not aware of. I know we did recently republish some of our change notification samples, which is the link that I put in there, but I don't believe that's what you are mentioning. Yeah, we'll have to take that one offline and see if there is anything in that. I'm not aware of anything.
Yeah, there is. It was shared as part of the Ignite session. So I'll dig out that Ignite session and I'll put it in the messaging chat.
Okay. I'll see on here. Is there any API to subscribe to a private Office 365 group by a person outside of that group? Or by subscribe, you're talking about the mailbox where you can subscribe and get basically messages in your inbox? Oh, to join the group. That should be one of the APIs for joining a group. Groups. Let's join groups. Update group. Where's the add member? I see there's an add a member, but I don't see one for joining specifically. Let's join teams. Yeah, I don't believe there's one today. I know there's capabilities to do that in the Exchange Online commandlets, but that's outside of Graph. And it's also not for a request to join. That's only for a add a member, remove a member, subscribe a member, and similar. And Paul comments on here, if a group is private, a non-member won't be able to find a join link. So let's see in here. Is there a way to use token create another Microsoft application, i.e. Azure DevOps, to call Microsoft Graph APIs? Very interesting scenario. If you look back into the ADAL days, Active Directory Application Library, Authentication Library, there was the concept of what we called a multi-resource refresh token, MRRT. I don't believe that's still the name for what that concept is, but the idea was that you could have a single Azure AD application that had permissions to various services, so Graph and SharePoint and Exchange and Azure DevOps or what have you. You could make a single request out to get your first access token, but the refresh token could be reused or resubmitted to other services, and you'd be able to continue using that without having to do the first initial access token hop, basically to get additional tokens. I don't know the current status of that, if that is supported in MSAL, or if that is something that's on the roadmap. I'm not sure if Jeremy or Vincent or anyone else on the call might have any update on that. I know it was something that was supported, at least with ADAL, but I don't know the currents of that.
Yeah, no, we'd have to take that one offline, I think.
Yeah, we'll note that one and see if we can get an answer for you. And will there be any Graph APIs for Microsoft Stream? Excellent question. We've been in good talks with the Stream folks. There should be more to share in a couple of months. Right now, there is no Stream support on Microsoft Graph, something that they're actively looking into. And when there's more to share on that, we'll do so. But at least today, there is nothing supported for Microsoft Stream. Curious, any plans for WVD and Graph integrations? Is that Windows Virtual Desktop? Yes. I will have to check our internal roadmap. I'm not aware of any integration points there. Any specific things that you're looking for from Graph integration with that? If you have any other feedback on that, Jay, please do let us know. Nothing I'm aware of off the top of my head for Graph integrations with Virtual Desktop. Why could some Graph APIs only be used with delegated access? This makes automation hard to implement. Another great topic. There are certain APIs out there, shall remain nameless, that only support delegated access. And they don't have app only. That might be just a case of it's a funding issue, or a prioritization issue, and they don't have either the manpower or the developers support for that. You can kind of fall back to use a service account in terms of use that as a delegated user out there. That does have its own issues in terms of what auth flows you're allowed to use or how you can automate that kind of process. If there are specific APIs that you're looking for app only, please do let us know. This is one of our kind of key points that we're looking at in the next probably 6-12 months, working with various workloads and API owners to address or even just identify which are those scenarios that don't yet support application only. We have kind of our short list of which ones we're kind of targeting, but more feedback from customers and partners would definitely help kind of make that case for which ones do we need to address and in kind of which priority order. So feel free to follow up myself and Jeremy offline if you'd like to. Oh, and Jeremy pointed to a feature request for that. Great. Is the Microsoft Graph.auth package the package to use to handle authentication in MS Graph, or is there another package? I believe this is actually a influx kind of topic. So the Microsoft.graph.auth was started in preview, 2018 or 2019, and work was started to basically simplify the process for acquiring a token and being able to use it with your Graph calls. What we kind of came to realize, though, was that Microsoft Graph team was doing things in parallel with what the Azure identity team was also doing. Azure specifically. So when they were trying to access tokens, they had already built out some libraries, and there's been some kind of unification of trying to build together a common, uniform way of acquiring tokens. I don't know what the final status is going to be for Microsoft.graph.auth, but I believe we're going to see a different package or different library that will be unified across all the different kind of scenarios that will help with that ability to choose, like, how do you actually access your tokens. So last I saw that Microsoft.graph.auth is still in preview. I don't believe that'll be what finally GAs. There'll be some more to share in that in the future as we kind of bring together the Azure side of the house with the Microsoft Graph side of the house. There you go. Jeremy's saying Azure.identity is the package. Christian's saying planner for us as well. Great. Thank you for that. Other questions, comments, feedback, other things that you'd like to hear more about? All right, with that, we'll move on to our wrap-up slides. Important call out we do want to make on here. We recently kind of formalized our Microsoft Graph TAP program. With this, there's a number of different benefits that you can gain as a customer or partner. We're holding Microsoft Graph TAP monthly calls. On this, we are sharing NDA information in terms of what are things coming down the road, early access to private previews or things that are coming up. There's additional benefits in terms of we're working to identify various customers and partners that have some intriguing and interesting solutions, kind of showcase those in case studies. So we're looking to grow out the program. We're currently sitting at, I believe, 55 plus members. That's companies, not individuals. So if you're looking to join into this, please do submit to our form on here. If you follow the link at the bottom of the page on here, aka.ms/graph-tap-form, all one word, no spaces on there. Feel free to submit into there. We're reviewing our submissions on usually a weekly basis or so. So to hear back from us, do note that just by applying, it does not guarantee acceptance into this. There are a couple of requirements in place first in terms of having a valid NDA signed with Microsoft already. So feel free to submit into that if that's something that you'd like to join into and help us gain early feedback into a lot of different APIs and things that are being built out. Also, do be aware that we have a number of different community calls across all of the Microsoft 365 developer ecosystem, Adaptive Cards, Graph for ourselves, Identity, Teams, Office add-ins, Power Apps, SharePoint, SharePoint General Dev, and SharePoint Framework. You can find all these different calls together on the bottom link as well, aka.ms M365 dev calls. Please do join in. Having this healthy ecosystem of people bringing their feedback, bringing their opinions, ideas, other things they want to share, that really helps for a vibrant community and helps make the entire ecosystem grow better. Also, Jeremy and our own Paul Schaeflein, they do host a podcast, the Microsoft 365 Developer Podcast. You can be able to find out a lot of great interviews, insider tips, news, information. I listen to this on a weekly basis myself. Some of the recent episodes are on here as well, discussing Fluent UI, Microsoft Lists, the identity libraries, and so forth. A lot of great topics out there that I highly recommend. I know it's a little more difficult sometimes to listen to podcasts now that we're in kind of lockdown mode, but great way to stay up to date on what's going on in the Microsoft 365 developer ecosystem. And with that, we thank everyone for joining us today on our August 2020 Microsoft Graph Community Call. Our next call will be on September 2nd, again at 8 a.m. Pacific time. You can find the link for joining into the call at the bottom of our page on here. And note that the recording for this session will be available on the developer YouTube channel following today. So feel free to view into that at your at leisure as well. With that, I thank everyone for joining us today. If you do have any follow-up questions, we'll be monitoring the chat and we'll try and get answers to those items. But without that, thank you very much for attending today, and we look forward to seeing you guys in September. Thanks so much.